I'm on this parking garage roof to ask you a simple question. Where is the dividing line between the air and space? Where does space start? There's the moon up there. So is the line here? Is it here? Or is it here? There is no line in space. This is a problem that has plagued space lawyers for more than half a century, and it remains, even today, one of the biggest problems in space law. So let's start with the problem and where it came from. I first learned about this issue in the Journal of Space Law from this article. Space law seems like a joke, but as companies like SpaceX, Virgin Galactic, and Blue Origin fly more and more, as hypersonic planes blur the line between space and air, and as countries like China become major space players, space law will be less of a novelty and more of a big deal. But right now, no one agrees on where airspace ends and space begins. Let's make clear what the problem is. Imagine you want to sue somebody here, or, I don't know, you murdered somebody here. Don't do that though. You know you are being tried under American law, not Canadian law, because you're on this side of the line. Now imagine that line is blurry. Things get pretty confusing. Or imagine there is no line at all. Things get really, really tricky really quick. That is the current situation for space lawyers. So why can't you just solve this with science? Well, the science doesn't exactly clear up where that line should be. This is Theodore von Karman, and it is hard to overestimate his impact on NASA and aerospace engineering. One concept drawn from his work is the Karman Line. It's where the atmosphere gets too thin to support airplane flight. It's like a definition of where space starts. If you follow the Karman Line, this is airspace, this is space. It's around 80 kilometers up, which is backed up by more recent work too, like this paper by Jonathan McDowell. But air thins, there is not a hard cutoff. That Karman Line is really a big blur, and that means the law has to decide where space is, not science. But nobody did that before it became a problem.
Today, a new moon is in the sky, a 23-inch metal sphere placed in orbit by a Russian rocket.
This is the day that space law became more urgent. On October 4th, 1957, the USSR launched the Sputnik satellite.
You are hearing the actual signals transmitted by the Earth-circling satellite, one of the great scientific feats of the age.
It orbited up to hundreds of miles away from Earth's surface. It was basically a beeping ball, but it was the impetus for everything from the intensification of the Cold War to the creation of DARPA and NASA. We, however, are concerned with space law. Did we do a cool effect on my voice there? Otherwise, I'm gonna sound really dumb. Let's try it again. We, however, are focused on space law. That was better. Think about the dilemma here that suddenly becomes a very real problem. If Soviets flew an airplane bomber over Chicago, it would be World War III. And Sputnik was flying over America, just 500 miles over America. So the question was it really going over America if it was so far away? And should airspace laws carry over into space? At first, this is what the newspapers freaked out about. They tallied the crossings over the US and mapped Sputnik's path. But we eventually decided not to launch an international war because Sputnik wasn't in airspace, it was in space. This necessitated new rules for space, and as a corollary, an idea of where space began, where stuff like Sputnik became okay. I'm not a lawyer. But two relevant treaties are like this one in aviation law, the 1944 Convention on Civil Aviation, which says that signatories own their airspace. The Big Space Law Treaty, the 1967 Treaty on Principles Governing the Activities of States in the Exploration and Use of Outer Space, including the Moon and other celestial bodies, which says, outer space, including the Moon and other celestial bodies, is not subject to national appropriation by claim of sovereignty. Nobody owns the stuff in space. So Sputnik helped us settle one space problem. It created this golden neutral zone that we call space. But the countries of the world never got together to decide exactly where space started. Timothy Nelson, space lawyer, describes the mess of approaches to a line defining space in this op-ed. There's a distance rule, just 100 kilometers or whatever, flat. Most aeronautic regulators use this, but they aren't all powerful. There's the von Karman Line, around 80 kilometers, with that scientific patina around it. And there's the lowest spot satellites can orbit in, a bit higher at 125 kilometers. And though the leader of Space Command and Space Force said that their military turf began at 100 kilometers and above, which makes it seem like that's where the United States defines space, the United States actually refuses to officially state where space starts, and they give astronaut wings to anybody who crosses 80 kilometers, or about 50 miles. You can imagine the problems. We have a blurry or non-existent line for government and corporate use of space, an area without a clear rule, because the space line, it's blurry. Space law is not a joke anymore. I will admit that by page 500 or so of How High the Sky, the definition and delimitation of outer space and territorial airspace in international law, I started to think things would eventually coalesce around that 100-kilometer mark. That's where the space line would be drawn. But at this point, that line would likely be drawn by the decisions of an international court, not by the world's governments or by the people of Earth. This weird debate shows just how hard international law can be to create and sustain because we can't even agree on the terms. It also shows the unanticipated problems of imposing Earth law onto the weirdness of space. We can't decide where space starts, and we also don't know where that golden neutral zone ends, and it becomes a free-for-all for every country again. Is Saturn still in the neutral spaceland created by that UN treaty? Or is there some planet beyond Jupiter where, like, the United States or China can go and claim it for their own country? Space lawyers need that line. It is not there yet, but it will be, even if we can't see it. Okay, that's it for this one. This is literally as close to space as I wanted to get. Grocery parking lot. But hey, you know, you can see the moon. Thank you for watching this video. I do history and personal stuff on here. If this interests you, please subscribe and like because it's really helpful at this stage. I've got links to some of the research below, and otherwise, I hope you have a pleasant night and that you stay entirely on the Earth side of the space line. All right.